And I'm going to adjust this a little bit. Can we turn the mic down just a little bit, because it's ringing in my hearing aids there. All right. All right, so Matthew chapter 14, starting at verse 22, and I want to look at all the way through verse 33. Now, this is obviously a well-known passage of Scripture. You've read it many times. You've heard sermons on it and lessons on it. But I want to talk tonight about the storms of life. You know, when we go through the storms of life. And I think this is a good illustration of what we're going to be talking about. So Matthew chapter 14, verse 22, and straightway Jesus constrained his disciples to get into a ship and to go before him unto the other side while he sent the multitudes away. And when he had sent the multitudes away, he went up into a mountain apart to pray. And when the evening was come, he was there alone. But the ship was now in the midst of the sea, tossed with waves, for the wind was contrary. And in the fourth watch of the night, Jesus went unto them, walking on the sea. And when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were troubled, saying, It is a spirit. And they cried out for fear. But straightway Jesus spake unto them, saying, Be of good cheer, it is I, be not afraid. And Peter answered him and said, Lord, if it be thou, bid me come unto thee on the water. And he said, Come. And when Peter was come down out of the ship, he walked on the water to go to Jesus. But when he saw the wind boisterous, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried, saying, Lord, save me. And immediately Jesus stretched forth his hand and caught him and said unto him, O thou of little faith, wherefore didst thou doubt? And when they were come into the ship, the wind ceased. Then they that were in the ship came and worshipped him, saying, Of a truth, thou art the Son of God. Now, I want to talk to you tonight and use some of this illustration that we read here about when the storms of life rage. When the storms of life rage, there's valuable lessons that we can learn in the storms of life. Now, how many of you don't like storms? Now, I'm not talking about necessarily just storms in our life, but I'm talking about weather storms. You know, it doesn't really bother me too much, but it depends on how fierce it is, right? And there's all kinds of levels of storms. And that's what I want to kind of talk about a little bit here. Looking at the background of this chapter, verses 1 through 13, you find the enemies of Christ. If you read starting at chapter 14, verse 1, you find that there are enemies of Christ, and John the Baptist is beheaded during this time. In verses 14 through 21, you're going to see a multitude in need, and Jesus provides for their need. And in the verses 22 through 27, you see the 12 disciples obeying Christ and departing in the boat. Because you remember that he said, get into the boat and depart. And they did. Verses 28 through 30, you see one stepping out where only faith could take him. And we want to talk about that. In verses 31 through 33, you see the sustaining hand of the Savior. So all of us go through storms of life. That's just the background of that chapter. Now, some may be small. Some may be huge. And now I'm talking about storms in our life personally, not the weather. I'm talking about storms in our life personally. But through all of these storms, there are some valuable lessons that we can learn. So let's see what some of those lessons are. First of all, storms are sometimes walked only with Jesus and no others. Sometimes storms in our lives are only walked with the Lord and no others. You ever been through a storm in your life where regardless of what people say, I feel you, I understand what you're, sometimes they don't really get it. Even if they've been through a similar kind of thing. Well, why do you say then that they don't get it? Because everybody's unique. Everybody's an individual in how they handle those things. The way I may handle something is not the way you may handle it, even though it may be the same kind of storm. So it's sometimes we have to walk through it alone. There's no other way as far as other Christians and all. Now, can other Christians be praying for us? Can they be encouraging? Can it be encouraging? Yeah, we ought to be encouraging, right? We ought to be saying, hey, I may not understand exactly what you're going through, or I may understand some of it, but let me tell you, just hang in there. Hang in there. I'm praying for you. I'm praying for you, and if there's anything I can do to help you, let me know. And all of us need help at one time or another. Now, the closer, first of all, we're talking about storms that sometimes walked only with Jesus and no others, and the closer a person walks with Jesus, the smaller the crowd's going to get. You ever notice that? Now, I like feedback, so if you don't feed back, then I'm just going to ramble. No, I won't ramble. I'll ramble on the page. But you ever notice that the closer you walk with the Lord, the smaller the crowd gets? Yeah. And, and then sometimes have you ever gotten to the point where you felt like, man, what in the world is everybody, don't want to hang around me no more? What's the matter with me? Well, it might be because you're getting closer to the Lord spiritually in your own life, and that tends to push others away. Not that you're intending to do that, but just because you're growing closer to the Lord, that alone is going to have an effect on folks. Let me give you, for instance, have you ever been at work? If you work a secular job, have you ever been at work and eventually people know that you're a Christian, they know how you are and how you behave, that you don't use language that shouldn't be used and all this kind of thing, and eventually what happens? They don't want to hang around you too long. Or if they say something, I hear this all the time, and I know you do as well, but they may use a cuss word, and they'll say, oh, excuse my French. And I'm like, French? I understood that. I don't speak French. So yeah, they're always doing something like that, right? Or they'll say, oh, sorry, and they'll name your name. That happens quite a bit. The closer a person walks with the Lord, the smaller the crowd's going to get. So when Peter got out of the boat, he had to leave his expectations behind him. And he had to leave the crowd, right? So Peter got out of the boat. Where'd the others stay? Right in the boat. They stayed there. He got out. So we can't expect everyone else in the boat to come with us. It's nice to have company. And you ever heard, and I know you've heard this, you can finish the statement, misery. And I don't know about you, but there are times when if I get miserable, you want somebody else to be down there with you, right? So, and it's bad to do that, but misery loves company. Some storms must be walked alone. 11 were in the boat, and only one got out. Peter didn't ask for the others to come with him. He didn't say, hey guys, let's go. What did he do? He just got out. Now, could you imagine, I want you to just stop and think. Could you imagine being one of the others? And you're in the boat, storms are raging. And by the way, how many of you have ever been on the water in a storm? I have. I care not to be ever again. Okay? I know Chick and I went fishing one time, and it really wasn't a storm, but the waves really got up there. And boy, I was like, whoa, man, and they were bouncing over the bow of the boat, and I was glad he was driving because I was just kind of praying and looking, But I was in a storm one time when I was a kid in a sailboat, and me and my dad and a man from the church, he had the sailboat, and we were going down we were in the James River, and that storm hit that sail, and that boat went over on its side, and man, I was ready to give up my sailing permanently. It was rough. But it's rough to be out there in the water in the storm. So here Peter is, and this storm's raging and all that. And the Bible says that they look out there and they see the Lord coming and they think it's a ghost. They use the word spirit. But for us, they think it's a ghost. Have you ever thought you saw a ghost? Now, we don't believe in ghosts in the way that the world is talking about. When I see something I ain't too sure about, I immediately go to, I think that's a demon, something of that nature. But boy, could you imagine being on a boat, the storm's going, they're trying not to get sick. Here comes the Lord walking on the thing, on the water, and all of them thought he was a spirit. Secondly, the majority of Christians, still under the first point, the majority of Christians would rather stay in the comfort zone. Now, where'd the other ones stay? In the boat. I'm not sure how comfortable that was, but it was probably a little more comfortable than stepping out on that water. And so we got to realize that God has a plan for our life individually, and it may include storms. It might include storms. Do you ever have them at work? If you're still working or when you work, do you ever have storms at work? I mean, it's just miserable sometimes. Obedience doesn't mean smooth sailing. That's my point. Obedience to the Lord and what the Lord asks us to do does not mean it's going to be smooth sailing. Matter of fact, it might be just the opposite. Now, there's two kinds of storms in our lives. The storms of correction. Can you give me an illustration of who that might have been? Old Testament. Starts with a J, ends in an H. Jonah. Very good. All right, so Jonah, storm of correction. And so, here's Jonah. He's running from the Lord. He doesn't want to go to Nineveh. I can't say as I blame him. If you ever done a study on the Ninevites, they were pretty ruthless. And he didn't want to go there. And so he's running from the Lord, and then he gets on the boat, and the storm comes. And they cast lots, and guess who it falls on? Oh, backslidden Jonah. And he's just straight up with him. He says, well, if you throw me over, then it'll stop. I mean, I think I may have, personally, I would have probably tried everything else but that. But that's what he did, and that's what happened. It's a storm of correction. And what happened? Jonah ended up going what? Where? He went to Nineveh eventually. He probably stunk, but he went to Nineveh. You understand what I mean by that, right? He stunk. He was in the belly of a whale. You ever been in the belly of a whale? No. I can't imagine. He threw him up on the thing, and he just... All right. So then there's the storms of consecration. Storms of correction, but there's also storms of consecration. Now, these are storms that bring us closer to the Lord. Now, all the storms will do that, but the storm of correction is going to, the Lord's going to get us back in line. Storm of consecration is what? Yeah, he's going to get us more dedicated to serving him. Unfortunately, most Christians today, and we all fall into this at time or two. Most Christians at time or two like to stay where it is comfortable. Now, notice Jesus had to constrain. Now, that word constrain doesn't mean that I'm stopping someone from doing something. It's just the opposite. He compelled them to come or to go in verse 22. So sometimes when you look at words, if we use a word like constrain in our vernacular, it is different from what it was used here in this verse. So kind of got to pay attention a little bit on that. Now, many Christians know that when they go through a storm, and if they fall or they fail through that storm, other Christians are going to be there to criticize them. Because you've heard this before. I'm not telling you anything that's new. What do we do to our Christians when they fail or they fall? We shoot them while they're down. You know what I mean? Somebody is going through a storm, and what happens? And they fall, and we stand back, we look and say, well, I knew it. It didn't take as long as I was expecting. But I knew it was going to happen. That ought not be. That ought not to be, right? I mean, we ought to be, we're all, by the way, going to fall. I mean, one of us in here that's not going to have that happen. Every one of us are going to fall. And I want folks, when I fall, and by the way, as long as you're breathing and living and walking around, you're going to fall. The only time when that stops is because you've taken your last breath. But we're all going to fall, and when that happens, I want my brothers and sisters in the Lord to lift me up, to encourage, to lift me up. But Peter wasn't afraid of this. He wasn't afraid of being criticized. I read a story about a farmer who wanted to impress his hunting buddies. And he bought the smartest, most intelligent, and expensive hunting dog he could find. Anybody ever used dogs to hunt? I have. I mean, they weren't mine. I was in the tree stand and dogs were running a deer. And I'll never forget, I'm standing up in this tree stand. It's about 16 feet off the ground. And I can hear them coming right for me, Right, and I knew that deer was going to come out of the woods right there on the trail that I was at. And so help me. So help me. That deer was coming through that woods, and by the time he got to the edge where I would be, I was shaking so bad I couldn't have hit the broadside of a barn. I pulled the trigger and a bunch of branches fell. But, they called it deer fever or whatever you call it, buck fever or something like that. But this guy had trained a dog. He had bought the most expensive one, and this dog could do some special things. So finally the time came when he and his friends were out in a boat hunting ducks. Now, I've never hunted ducks. Chick has. He can tell you all about it. Some others, anybody else hunt ducks? Ever done that? I haven't. So I have no clue. But finally, ducks came over and they shot some ducks and were able to shoot several of them. And the farmer looked at his dog now. He's wanting to impress. So he looks at the dog and he says, all right. He says, he gave him the signal, and the dog jumped out of the boat and proceeded to walk on the water and pick up all of the ducks and walk on the water back to the boat. As the farmer began to swell with pride, now I would. He's swelling with pride over all this accomplishment that dog did. And so the one old farmer in the boat that was with him, after musing over what had just happened, he looks at the other guy and he goes, your dog can't swim, can he? Yeah. Pitiful, right? Pitiful. Encourage one another. So many give Peter this same reaction when they read this story. There's Peter, jumped out, and what do they say? Jumped out too soon, he sank and all that kind of stuff. And wait a minute, Peter got out and actually took a few steps on the water. All right? By the way, we do that sometimes with Job's wife. I've read that story many times and studied it when I was in college, even in high school. I took a class in high school that was called Job, the book of Job. Believe it or not, that tells you how long ago that was. And it wasn't a Christian high school; it was a public high school, Hampton High School. And when we read stories or we see things happen to others, let's not be so quick to jump the gun and criticize. Job's wife said to him, just curse the Lord and die. Well, hold on a second. She did say that. But what had she lost? She had lost all her children. She had lost all the wealth that she was associated with Job. She's standing there watching her husband in pain and looking like he's going to die, sitting in ashes. And then when we read the story, all we can see is that, man, what kind of woman was she? She must have been horrible. No, I don't think so. I think she was just going through it just like in a different way, but the same thing Job was going through, and she was probably on the close edge of a mental breakdown. Who knows? Secondly, storms can increase our faith, by the way. They can increase our faith. There are storms that will help us understand that Jesus knows everything that I'm going through. And I want to tell you, Jesus knows everything you're going through. There's no surprises. I heard a preacher say many years ago, did it ever occur to you that nothing occurs to God? I've never forgot that statement because it's so true. It's so true. Jesus knows exactly what you and I are going through. Nothing in our life happens by chance. I know we use this statement, oh man, good luck. And no such thing. Nothing happens by chance in our life as a Christian. We are going through whatever the Lord brings us through and asks us to go through. Sometimes the storms of life are dark. And in the story here, it was the fourth watch. That's about 3 to 6 a.m., 3 in the morning to 6 a.m. I happen, the older I get, I tend to get up at the fourth watch. I try to go back to bed, but I tend to get up around 3 a.m., wake up, and I try to get back to sleep. But the fourth watch seems to be kind of special. So storms in life are dark. You ever been through something so dark you didn't think you could see the light at the end of the tunnel, as they say? Sometimes they're frightening. The boat was being tossed to and fro about 3 miles from shore, by the way. Can you imagine? 3 miles from the shore, you're not seeing land at that point, and the boat is being tossed to and fro. It's pretty bad. And they're troublesome at times. The disciples thought they were seeing an apparition. All right, so storms help us to understand that Jesus knows exactly what. Do you think any of that was a surprise to the Lord? Do you think anything that you and I go through is a surprise to the Lord? By the way, you don't even know what you're getting ready to go through, but He already does. Sometimes when I'm doing my devotion and I pray, I'll just ask the Lord, I don't know what's coming. But I know that you know. So please help me to have faith in you as I go through whatever it is. Let me tell you, when the doctor in December took a picture of my eye, both my eyes, and then gave me the news that if you don't change something or if this doesn't work, you're going to go blind. That was kind of stormy. And it's still not over. I've only been over 1 or 2 waves, so to speak. And I've still got to go through shots. I got one coming up May the 2nd. And then I got another one in June, another one in July, another one in August. And then they'll decide if they want, how often they want to give them to me. But you have to, I know that the Lord already knows, what it's going to be. So I'm trusting in the Lord in all this. Storms can help us to lean upon the Lord more. God's never late in His timing of help. You know that? Never late. The Lord can walk on that which makes us afraid to move. Have you ever gotten frozen? And let me explain that. A storm in your life makes you afraid to even move. Mentally, we shut down. We just, I can't. By the way, sometimes Christians, and this just kind of came to my thought, sometimes we go through storms, we Christians go through storms, and you know what happens sometimes? I just drop out of church. I don't want to talk to anybody. I don't want anybody to see me in this state. Wrong. That's the best thing you can do is get around Christians that love you and care for you and are concerned for you and will pray for you. One of the worst things we can do is to drop out. I mean, it's like, I don't know, and I'm not throwing blame. I'm just saying that that's a tendency that we naturally do, and we have to fight against that. And somebody says, "Oh, how you doing?" Well, honestly, I don't have time to tell you everything, but just pray for me because I'm going through a storm. We don't have to give details. It may be something that just you and the Lord are dealing with. Third and final thing, storms give us an opportunity to allow the Lord to work in our lives. Now, in verse 30, chapter 14, Peter began to sink and he cried out for the Lord. By the way, have y'all ever heard this song, Under His Feet? There was an old group called Gethsemane Quartet when I was growing up. And they did this song, and basically the chorus is, under His feet, there's not a trial you'll go through that He cannot meet. Whenever you've waded out too far in waters too deep, remember that Jesus knows your trials, they're under His feet. And then some of it says, just remember that when you waded out too far in waters too deep, remember that waves are over your head, they're under His feet. Isn't that good? I mean, that's so true. That's so true. So Peter began to sink. He cried out to the Lord to help him in verse 30. And I want you to notice, as Peter began to sink, notice who it was that stretched out his hand. Who was it? It was Jesus. Peter called out to the Lord and said, Lord, save me. And the Lord reached out. It was the Lord that reached out. The guys in the boat didn't throw no lifeline. You know? What are they doing? Well, there he goes. You know? It's the Lord. And by the way, Peter cried out to the right one. We get on Peter a lot, and he blows it just like all of us. But he sure enough knew who to call to when he got in trouble like that. So he had to see, though, first of all, that he couldn't do it without the Lord. Had to see he couldn't do it without the Lord. But what the Lord starts, I want you to notice, He always finishes. What did the Lord do? Reached out, grabbed Peter, pulled him up, and did what? Took him to the boat. Then what did the Lord do? Turned around, rebuked the wind, calmed the seas. Whatever God starts in our lives, whether it's a storm or whether it's Pleasant Valley, whatever it is, God not only starts it, He finishes it for our good. All right? Well, I'm going to stop right there, and because we got about 5 minutes, and I want you to get into your prayer groups and pray. And whatever it is you might be going through, you don't necessarily have to tell everything to each other. But just, let everybody know. Hey, let your group know. Hey, I'm going through a storm. Please pray. Or I know somebody's going through a storm. Please pray. All right? All right, so go ahead and get into your prayer groups, and I'll come back up in about 5 minutes.